A witch hunt is raging in the streets of Moscow. Now every car is suspicious, every parking spot a potential crime scene, every shadow a threat. Moscow police and the FSB are busy chasing a ghost they cannot catch in the back streets. The danger for Putin is no longer at the door. The danger is now in the corridors. The internet outages in Moscow have little to do with security. They have far more to do with Putin's belief that one of his oldest allies is plotting against him. That name is Sergei Shoigu, Russia's former defense minister and secretary of the Security Council. Now, this is going to be a controversial topic, and I don't care if YouTube doesn't promote it. I'm going to expose the truth anyways. Controversial topics like this one end up getting suppressed by the algorithm, except when you force the algorithm to promote it by clicking on the like button. According to a leaked EU intelligence report published by CNN and the Financial Times, Putin is seriously concerned about being overthrown by his own political elite and about a drone assassination. Former Defense Minister Shoigu has been flagged as a coup risk, and there may be very little Putin can do to reverse this. He can only purge generals to cover his failures and flees to underground bunkers at every opportunity. Putin's paranoia and fears have gone so far that he didn't invite a single Duma deputy from his own party to the Victory Day ceremony. He once wanted to frighten the world. Now he's afraid of his own palace. Of course, this paranoia didn't form overnight, but a specific event may have triggered everything. On December 22, 2025, Lieutenant General Fanil Savarov, head of the General Staff's Operational Training Department, was killed by a car bomb in Moscow, in his own building's parking garage. 3 days later, Putin summoned security service chiefs to an emergency meeting. Chief of the General Staff Gerasimov harshly criticized FSB Director Bortnikov for failing to protect senior officers. Bortnikov defended himself, citing insufficient resources and personnel. As the two security structures accused each other, Putin closed the meeting with orders to present concrete solutions within 1 week. Then, in March 2026, a development shook the Kremlin's internal dynamics even further. Former Defense Minister Shoigu's deputy and close ally, Ruslan Salikov, was arrested on corruption charges. The EU intelligence report assesses this arrest as a violation of the implicit protection agreements among elites, because an unwritten rule existed in the Kremlin. If you're part of the inner circle, you don't go to prison. Putin broke that rule. The report's most striking section concerns Shoigu himself. Despite being shifted to the Security Council Secretariat, Shoigu is being linked to coup risk because he still holds significant influence in the senior military command structure. For years, he was Putin's closest friend. They fished together, hiked in the mountains together. But now that friendship may have turned into a security problem, and the Shoigu file may be far deeper than assumed. In November 2025, the FSB announced it had prevented an assassination attempt on Shoigu at Moscow's Troyekurovskoye cemetery. A sabotage group allegedly directed by Ukrainian intelligence had set up an explosive device during Shoigu's visit to relatives' graves. A camera and bomb hidden inside a flower vase were detected. But an interesting question arises here. Was this assassination attempt truly Ukrainian in origin, or could it have been part of the power struggle inside the Kremlin? Shoigu's connections to the military command structure, his relationships with intelligence services, and his knowledge of why the invasion failed make him an extremely dangerous figure. Despite being removed from the defense ministry, he may have built his own network inside the army over the years, and the massive power loss brought by the Ukraine war may have activated that network. The association of Shoigu with power struggles within the Kremlin is nothing new. On the morning of November 14th, the heavy silence of Troyekurovskoye cemetery in the heart of Moscow was shattered by a wave of panic that revealed one of Russia's darkest secrets. The FSB announced in an official statement that it had prevented a high-level assassination attempt. The target was Sergei Shoigu, Russia's Security Council secretary, once Putin's right-hand man and closest vacation companion. Official channels and the FSB rushed to blame Ukraine for the attack and attempted to close the case. According to Russian state agency TASS and Moskovsky Komsomolets, the Federal Security Service FSB announced that it had thwarted a sophisticated assassination attempt targeting Sergei Shoigu at the last minute. The technical details of the incident point to a targeted, intelligence-backed execution attempt rather than a routine terrorist act. According to FSB reports and leaked information, the plan centered on Shoigu's routines and emotional sensitivities. The assassins had obtained intelligence in advance that Shoigu would visit the grave of a family member, likely his mother or father. This is an extremely private detail that would be difficult to obtain without an inside source. The saboteur's method was classic: an innocent-looking flower vase left at the grave. However, this vase contained a high-capacity explosive, probably a compact charge of RDX or C4 derivative, and a hidden micro-camera to confirm the victim's arrival. The plan was to detonate the bomb remotely when Shoigu arrived at the grave, and kill Russia's Security Council secretary by blowing him up at his ancestor's gravesite. The FSB announced that it had detained a Central Asian immigrant and 2 Russian citizens as a result of the operation. The suspects allegedly stated in their statements that they received instructions from an agent named Ruslan from Ukrainian intelligence. However, this official narrative contains serious gaps when examined through the lens of the logistics and strategic logic of the scene. Simply walking into an area like Troyekurovskoye, which is protected by high-level security, monitored by cameras at every corner, and frequented by the elite, carrying a vase loaded with explosives and mounting it on a gravestone, does not seem like something that drug-addicted migrants, as defined by the FSB, could accomplish. This suggests that either the security protocols on the ground were disabled, or someone on the inside opened the doors. We need to pause here and turn on our investigative lens. The FSB's accusations against Ukraine and the cracks in this narrative are bigger than the explosive itself. Sergei Shoigu may no longer be a high-value target for Ukrainian intelligence, GUR, or the SBU. After being removed from his position at the Ministry of Defense, his direct influence in the military decision-making mechanism has diminished, shifting him to a more symbolic and administrative role, Secretary of the Security Council. Kiev's decision to expend its resources on such a risky operation in the heart of Moscow, targeting a figure unlikely to directly alter the course of the war, is considered a strategically weak possibility. Expend Ukraine's limited and valuable intelligence resources on an old friend, unlikely to change the course of the war, is tactical suicide. It would be a mistake to assume that this operation bears the signature of Ukrainian special forces, as Russian sources also report no evidence of this. Western intelligence sources and independent analysts emphasize that such spectacular but non-strategic assassination attempts are usually part of Russia's own internal power struggles. This incident reeks of an internal purge attempt rather than an external attack. The historical rivalry between the FSB and the army, GRU, combined with tensions over who will be blamed for the failures in the Ukraine war, may have put symbols of the old regime like Shoigu in the firing line. After Prigozhin's purge, it is no secret that the system is inclined to remove other parts it now sees as a burden from the equation through unnatural means. Had that bomb in the cemetery exploded, the Kremlin could have blamed it on Ukraine and used it to consolidate the people. However, the real winners would have been the other power centers that gained space at the table with Shoigu's removal. This failed, or perhaps deliberately thwarted, attempt is the clearest evidence that Moscow's security elite are at each other's throats. This trap set for Shoigu in the cemetery pressed the panic button in the Kremlin. Everyone is asking, where is Putin? I'll answer, we don't know. The generals don't know either. He probably even confuses his own location sometimes. As independent sociologist Konstantin Gaza points out, Putin is currently ruling Russia not as a head of state, but like a fugitive who fears being located and shot by his own men at any moment. Shoigu being targeted in the cemetery shows how justified Putin's fear is. The security perimeter hasn't been breached, the perimeter itself has become the threat. The investigative journalism project Sistema and Western media have revealed with technical evidence that Vladimir Putin has built identical offices in 3 different corners of Russia: Sochi, Novo-Ogaryovo, and Valdai. Vladimir Putin's security paranoia is not a new phenomenon, but recent investigations document how this fear has turned into an architectural obsession. A comprehensive report published by Radio Liberty's Sistema Investigative Journalism Unit revealed that the places where Putin governs Russia are actually theater stages. The investigation confirms with technical evidence that Putin had identical offices built in his residences in Novo-Ogaryovo outside Moscow, Sochi on the Black Sea coast, Bocharov-Ruche, and Valdai in the north. The Bocharov-Ruche residence in Sochi, the Novo-Ogaryovo outside Moscow, and the mysterious Valdai Retreat in the north. The offices in these three different locations were designed as millimeter-perfect copies of each other. The same wooden panels, the same tone of varnished tables, the same brand of door handles, and even the same patterned carpets. This was not an interior design preference, but a strategic deception operation. The goal was simple. Putin's own guards and generals should not know where he was physically at any given moment. This is not a decoration choice. This is a military camouflage tactic. Everything is copied, from the pattern of the wallpaper, to the color of the parquet flooring, to the arrangement of those famous special communication phones, Kremlevka, on the desk. Why? Because when Putin appears on television or receives a general, he doesn't want assassins to know his physical location. You think he's in Moscow, at the Kremlin, doing his job. But he could actually be 400 kilometers away from Moscow, in his forest hideout in Valdai. According to information leaked to Western media and confirmed by Fox News, Putin sometimes gives the impression that he is in Moscow while actually sunbathing in Sochi. And sometimes he is believed to be in St. Petersburg while hiding in his shelter in the Valdai forests, under the shadow of Pantsir S-1 air defense systems. Why? Because he feared that what was done to Shoigu in the cemetery would be done to him in his bedroom. The vase bomb targeting Shoigu was the missing piece, explaining why Putin used those absurd tables stretching for miles, why he held video conferences even with his most loyal men, and why he cloned his offices. The security ring around Moscow wasn't just breached, it was shattered. Western analysts and independent sources note that Putin has barely set foot in the Kremlin, especially since Ukraine's long-range drone attacks began and these internal assassination attempts increased. This was not a head of state security protocol. It was the construction of a paranoid architecture, fearing his own shadow and viewing everyone around him as a potential assassin. As Churchill once said, the political intrigues of the Kremlin resemble a bulldog fight under a rug. An outsider only hears the growling and only knows who won when the bones fly out from underneath. Putin had previously survived a coup attempt by a hair. In June 2023, Wagner leader Prigozhin marched on Moscow with an armed convoy. That crisis was weathered. But the Prigozhin example clearly demonstrated one thing. Threats coming from within Russia's security structures are the most lethal for Putin. And now the EU intelligence report flags Shoigu in exactly that category. The concrete result of this distrust resembles not a head of state security, but the isolation of a dictator under siege. Putin and his family have left their Moscow and Valdai residences. In 2026, he has not visited a single military installation, whereas in 2025, he had made at least 17 public appearances. He stays for weeks in underground bunkers in Krasnodar. State media broadcast pre-recorded footage to create the impression Putin is working normally. According to some sources, he uses at least 3 surgically altered body doubles. Surveillance cameras have been installed in the homes of his cooks, bodyguards, and photographers. Communications in some parts of Moscow are periodically cut, and the relationship with the Duma also appears severed. No deputy was invited to this year's Victory Day ceremony. Yet voices rising from the Duma are not new for Putin. In 2022, municipal council members from 18 districts across Moscow and St. Petersburg had demanded Putin's resignation through an open petition. The St. Petersburg Smolnitsky District Council had called on the Duma to try Putin on charges of high treason. The petition stated that Putin's decisions harm Russia's security, cause mass casualties, and accelerate NATO's expansion. Those deputies were punished with charges of discrediting the army. But the message had been delivered. And now, 4 years later, the discontent behind that message may have grown. In April 2026, a far harsher warning came from the Duma. A deputy openly said, "We told you a dozen times, so the economy is bound to collapse. The first quarter has already hit rock bottom. If you don't take urgent financial, economic, and other measures, by fall we'll be facing a repeat of what happened in 1917. 1917. The revolution in which the Romanov dynasty fell and the Tsar was overthrown from his throne. These words being spoken from the Duma podium may show that the regime's own institutions are beginning to crack. Putin's refusal to invite even his own party's deputies to Victory Day may show that the Kremlin cannot trust even its inner circle. This picture points to a security crisis at the very top of the regime. And just as this crisis was deepening, the Ukraine war had already arrived at Moscow's doorstep. On the night of May 4th, Ukrainian drones struck the Mosfilm Tower. This was not an ordinary attack. Its symbolic depth was far more severe. Because this luxury residential complex sits 7 kilometers from the Kremlin and 3 kilometers from the Defense Ministry. And this was not an isolated incident. Between May 2nd and 9th, hundreds of drones attacked Moscow. The attacks targeted not the suburbs, but the city center and elite neighborhoods. Moscow, surrounded by S-400s and Pantsirs, could not prevent a drone from detonating 3 kilometers from the Defense Ministry. If a drone can reach 7 kilometers from the Kremlin, it can reach the Kremlin itself. For a leader who already cannot leave his bunker due to coup and assassination fears, this may have been the last straw. Putin's response was striking, piling all air defenses onto Moscow. For the first time in approximately 20 years, no tanks crossed Red Square. Checkpoints everywhere, snipers hanging from windows, internet cut. In street interviews, Russians asked, "We're losing on every front, so what are we celebrating?" In political science, there exists a concept called capital vulnerability. When people living under a dictatorship suddenly realize that things are not going well and that even the capital is not safe. When elites begin to grasp this, an uncomfortable question emerges. If you can't even protect the heart of the capital, how can we trust you to protect us? Putin may be unable to find an answer to that question. May 9th, Russia's most sacred day, may have turned into a nightmare this year. We saw the exact opposite of a show of force. Barricades instead of tank convoys, a siege atmosphere instead of a military parade. This ritual built on projecting power showed just how weakened the Kremlin has become. And perhaps the most critical question is this: how much longer will Russia's elites tolerate this weakness? Putin had promised security in exchange for obedience, but now there is neither security nor victory. Forbes billionaires are being robbed, commanders are being purged, deputy ministers are fleeing, and the leader is hiding underground. So, what do you think about this topic? Share your thoughts in the comments.